I'm more satisfied now and happier now creatively and artistically than I've ever been in my career. And what's interesting about this, and this is where I get very philosophical and emotional. When I was young, I thought I had my life all figured out. Your life never goes exactly how you expect it. And so doors open, doors close, tragedy happens, big wonderful things happen, and they send you in directions that you've never, ever, ever expect, even out of tragedy. I wouldn't be doing this right now and happy with what I'm doing unless my wife had passed away. And that's a really weird thing to think about. If she hadn't passed away and I hadn't gone through that trauma and that heartbreak and this ultimate just despair, then I wouldn't have gone the path that I went to take me to the point where I said, I want to do this thing on my own. Because before she got sick, I had this skyrocketing trajectory at Disney. I was going to be a career guy. I was going to retire from Disney. And I was on a path to do that. But I got taken down a different path. The thing I tell people is, the sun's going to come up. If you're going through a tragedy, if you're going through something that feels like you just don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to open your eyes the next day, just know that life is going to change. Something's going to happen. The sun's going to come up. Just get to that next sunset. Get to that next sunrise. And your life will start rolling again. Because I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to live. But I just decided to keep going, and each day got a little bit less hard. It's never easy, but it gets less hard. And you just get better at it and better at it and better at it. And then here you are.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me, Aaron.
Absolutely.
Yeah, welcome to Artists in Motion. This is our podcast where we talk with filmmakers and animators about their career, how they got to where they are, and their art, their own passions and inspirations for their art and their life.
My favorite subjects.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. So I know this has been a crazy Annecy week right now. I'm just curious how, just within this week, you've been premiered Snow Bear, and now you've seen it.
Yeah.
Multiple times you've been bringing it around. How has it felt just in this moment to finally have this project out there and sitting with audiences?
Snow Bear is it's such a personal project. We started, the inkling of an idea of it started about 9 years ago. And it really was just this idea about I wanted to create something of my own. I wanted to do my own film. And so I came up with this idea of a lonely polar bear, one character in the Arctic, simple backgrounds, which I thought were simple. They weren't quite simple. And that was the seed of an idea. This lonely polar bear makes a snow bear because he's lonely. But I wanted to make it more personal. And so I started digging deep. And I lost my wife to breast cancer 18 years ago. And so I started equating that experience and the pain and the heartbreak of that and losing somebody like a snow bear going away as well. And feeling lost, like he gets lost in the ocean. And so there was a lot of parallels that I was able to kind of bring to that simple idea to make it richer and more emotional. And so it was a long journey and very, very personal to me. And then I sat down for 3 years and actually made it. And so to go through all of that, to have that, kind of throw your heart out onto the screen and then finally get it out to the world, it's really cool. It's really emotional again, and people are getting it, so that makes me happy. And but they also just enjoy the story, and they laugh, they cry, and they're doing everything that I want them to do. So it's thrilling for myself and for Nick to get that story out there finally after sitting on it for so long and sharing it with everyone and having it so well received.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And having seen the full thing for my first time this past week, I saw the opening, I think 7 minutes of it last year. Yeah. And then seeing how it ended and how it evolved and how much the richness of the emotions and the seriousness that it took the characters and in transitioning. I won't go too much into spoilers here. I know it will be coming out later online at some point, I'm sure. But you really managed to pull off such a touching story, and I'm curious to hear a bit more about how you balance both the desire and drive of the importance, I know, for you to create animations for family, but then also bringing in more serious emotional tones. Like, how does that play?
Think of all the animated films that have really touched you, whether it's Lion King or Bambi, you know. And I always use those films because they have very heavy themes in them. They have death in them. They have parents dying. They have betrayal and all these horrible things that people forget about. So when you don't, the most successful family films are accessible to everybody, but they don't write down to children. And so I'm very adamant about not doing that. And so when you make it for you, when you can put yourself into it as a filmmaker, the only way you can do that is to access things that you've gone through in order to get it onto the screen. It becomes real. And then it becomes, I hate this word, craft, but it does become that. Then it's all about, you know, understanding how to weave a story that you can then take the audience on, and you bring them up and you bring them down and you bring them, you know, you go on this roller coaster ride of emotion. And in the end, hopefully you've said something and they feel satisfied and they feel wonderful. You know, Pixar, John Lasseter, always described their films, you know, they were never comedies, they were never adventure tales. They just had this, they were a little of everything. They had balance. And that's what I think a really good family film has, is just balance of fun and emotion and something that resonates and it's going to stick with you for a long time, like the Lion Kings and the Beauty and the Beasts and all those types of things.
Yeah, real tearjerkers. And I think you've just created another one.
I hope so. But you know, when you're working on a short, you got to keep those stories simple. And so I kept it very simple so that I had room to play those emotions and room to play the fun. And you know, and all of that. So,
Well, I'm really want to talk about the storytelling and more of the production of Snow Bear, but before we get into that, I'm curious to pull back a little bit on your career and some of your trajectory leading to this. I mean, of course, as everybody knows, you're animator on, you know, Lion King, Aladdin, and then leading into directing Brother Bear. I'm curious, could you tell us, how did Brother Bear as a project first come to you? And
I went to it. So what happened was, you know, like you said, I'm going to go way back. So I started out wanting to work for National Geographic. I wanted to be an illustrator. That's what I went to college for. I went to the Ringen College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida. At the time, they weren't an animation school. They didn't have animation. It was just kind of traditional art, illustration, fine art, graphic design. But that door so I went there wanting to go to National Geographic, but that door closed. And so I was looking for other opportunities. And Disney, for the first time, was looking outside of animation schools. They wanted to see if they could take people that could draw and teach them how to animate. So I put together a portfolio, thought it would be interesting, never thought about animation. I got in, and I was mentored by wonderful Glenn Keane, who's for those people that know animation or don't know animation, he's one of the best contemporary living animators alive in the world today. And so I was very lucky to be mentored and taught by him. And so that started my love of animation and the growth. And I was hired at the end of that internship. And so during that time, I worked on films like The Rescuers Down Under and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Lion King and Pocahontas and Mulan. And with every film, I grew a little bit more and grew a little bit more. And I became a supervising animator and you know, a kind of a leader along the way. And so by the time we finished Mulan, I found out about this film that was in development called Bears. And I love drawing and animating animals. That's my first love. And so that really piqued my interest. So I went to the head of the studio and I asked, you know, what was it all about? And I thought maybe I could art direct it or character design or do something. And no one was working on it. It had been put in development because Michael Eisner, who was the head of the studio at the time at Disney, Lion King had done so well, and they realized they didn't have any big epic animal pictures in development. And so he thought we should do a big North American animal picture like we did with Lion King and see if we can score again like they did with Lion King. But they worked on it for a little bit and it just kind of stalled out. And so when I found out about it, it was just kind of in development. No one was attached to it. No one was working on it. So I said, hey, I'd love to, you know, work on this. And to my surprise, the head of our studio, Tom Schumacher, came back to me. He said, hey, would you like to direct it? I mean, completely surprised. And so I mulled it over, and I decided, yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful opportunity, and it was a big risk. I didn't know what I didn't know, is what I always tell people. You know, I thought I knew how to make animated movies, but I really didn't know the front end. I didn't know how to construct a story. I didn't know how to take people through on this journey. And so I always tell everybody that Brother Bear became my 6-year filmmaking school. And by the time I was done making Brother Bear, I was ready to make a movie.
Because it was a totally different story when you came to it, right?
Yeah, it was a completely different story. It was treated more like Robin Hood, Disney's Robin Hood, where it was anthropomorphic bears and they had costumes and the whole thing. And I wasn't interested in telling that kind of story. I wanted it to be naturalistic, like a North American Lion King, basically, and with humans. and so that's what I did. So I went to the head of the studio, Tom Schumacher, and I said, hey, can we throw all this out and start over? He said, yeah, it's your movie. And that's something that people ask me a lot. How much creative freedom do you have at Disney as a filmmaker? You have all the creative freedom. You still have to run it through a gauntlet. But as far as bringing the ideas to the table and getting them out there, they want you to bring the ideas to the table. Yeah. So it was a great environment.
Now, I'm curious because after Disney, I know you transitioned to more independent filmmaking, and you were working on a story for some time with Chuck Williams. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about the transition from a studio to independent, and what were your differences in experience there?
So the peak of my time at Disney was Brother Bear. And right after Brother Bear, they didn't have a whole lot of stuff in development. And they still had a couple of studios. They had the main studio in Los Angeles, Disney did, animation studio. And then we also had the animation studio in Orlando. And so we had this really huge, I think it was about 700 or 800 people on staff that were contracted, that you're paying every week. And if you don't have films to make, that money's going out the door. Our studio alone in Florida was burning almost $1 million a week, about $850,000 a week just in salaries. Wow. And there was nothing in development behind it. So that's money that's just going out down the tubes. And so Disney made the decision to shut the studio down. And so that ended a 15-year, when I did my internship to the time that they shut the studio down, I came in as the founding member of that studio, and I was literally the last artist to walk out the door. And that was a 15-year period. And so they laid everybody off, except about 10 of us. And I transferred to Los Angeles, and I had another contract to develop another film. And while we were there, my wife, Karen, and my 2 kids, Austin and Dustin, we moved to California, and I started developing this other film. But it was during that time that, it was the next year that we got there, that my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so it wasn't getting better. And I was trying to make a film, trying to take care of her, the emotional stress, the physical stress, all of that, everything she's going through, and taking the toll on the family. And all of that, and it really became impossible to make a film, to the point where the heads of the studio came to me and they said, hey man, we're taking you off the movie. And that's when I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. 2 years into that is when I lost my wife, and she passed. And that's when I really went off the cliff, and she was my soulmate. She was my first love. And so it really took me I just lost any kind of desire to make anything. So I was just going through the motions.
Yeah, and how did you find that again? Because
Well, that's the thing. It's time. It's the cliche everyone tells you when you go through traumatic loss and that sort of thing. Time heals all wounds, and it's a truth. It's cliches are cliches for a reason. And it's only in the last few years that I can sit here and talk to you about it without crying. So, but when they took me off the film, that's when I realized how far I'd fallen, and I needed to find that spark that made me want to create, that made me want to live, that made me want to pull my family together. And so in the 30 seconds after they took me off the film, they were saying, "Yeah, but we want to keep you here. We'd like you to go and help out with," and in mid-sentence I said, "Nah, I think I quit." And they went, whoa, 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 whoa. I said, no, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at you guys. I would have done the same thing that you're doing. I get it, but I need to find me. And I said, I told them, I said, the 2 things that were my identity for the last 20 years was my family, which is gone, and my job, which is gone. I need to find out who I am again, and I can't. I'm not. I got to start over. And so I went back and sold my house and decided to go back to Florida. And I found this job back in Florida where they were starting this new studio, and they wanted a creative head and all that. It was great. And so we went back and I worked for about 2 years at the studio with Chuck Williams, who came with me, and we were developing this film called The Legend of Tembo, an elephant movie. But it's not Disney. It wasn't Disney. It's a smaller studio, but run by kind of amateur executives, for a lack of a better way of putting it. And they ran the studio into the ground. They went bankrupt. And so I literally came to work one day to have a screening of the film because we were about to go into production, and the doors were locked. And so that's when I said, you know what? I'm done putting my life in the hands of executives. If I fail, I want to fail because I failed. Because I was doing everything right. We were making a great film. And so I went back home again to the home I was going to sell again. You know, I sold my home in California. I knew I had to sell this one because I had no job. And I thought, you know what? I got to really figure out this time what the heck I want to do. And I started thinking about Glenn Keane, my mentor, and all the information that he had shared with me and made me grow. And then all the other artists over my career that shared with me and made me grow. And this is kind of in the early age of YouTube and being able to, you know, share videos and that sort of thing online. And I thought, I can do this. I can create tutorials and lessons and take everything that I have in my head and put them out on video and share them with young people that are just coming into the industry and give them a head start. And maybe they can get further ahead than I was quicker, and in the way that Glenn did for me. And so that became the beginning of Creature Art Teacher, our education site. And that's when Nick and I, basically about that time, Nick and I met. And then so the last 14 years we've been growing that business. Yeah. And what that's done is that as the business has grown, it's created revenue for us. And so now, and it's to a small degree, it's self-sustaining. I mean, you have to maintain it, obviously. There's a lot of work that goes into that. But it's a revenue stream that keeps coming in that enables us to then go away and go, okay, I want to make this short film Snow Bear, which is how that came about. And another beautiful part of this whole process was about 8 years ago, while we were doing that, he introduced me to his sister-in-law. And we hit it off, fell in love. And we got married.
Wow.
And so I'm remarried. And so all of that became the basis for Snow Bear. Wow. You know, and so you know how Snow Bear ends. And so it all kind of goes in that direction. And so you take life and you take these things and you take all the turmoil and you boil it down and you make a story. You know, one of our mission statement when we started the online school, I got really annoyed with how expensive private art schools are in the United States. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about tuitions of $45,000, $50,000 a year, and you're talking about kids coming out of school, you know, $150,000, $180,000, $200,000 in debt, I think that's crazy. I think it's criminal. And so we said, hey, let's create. It's not going to be a substitute, but it can be it can subsidize. It can be an alternative, not an alternative, but it can subsidize a supplement. And you know, this is digital. We're not having to pay for storage and store books and all these different things. Yeah. This is digital software, and that's digital information. Yeah. And so we thought we can sell it at any price point and make it affordable for anybody around the world. We made sure to price everything to the lowest common economic denominator in the world. Yeah. You know, we started looking at some of the lower income countries. And for a couple of reasons. We wanted to do something good. I wanted to do something that I could feel good about, make Karen proud. But there's another alternative reason for that. You can go, you know, if you're doing digital goods, you can price it down, and now all of a sudden you're casting a much bigger net, and you're going worldwide much quicker. Yeah. And so, you know, at the risk of sounding like I have a huge ego, I couldn't walk along the lake at Annecy more than 10 feet before I'd have someone come up and want an autograph and want a photo, and then another 5 feet, and then the same thing was happening in Yerevan.
And so that's another thing I'm curious to hear more of your perspective on, because you've made this wonderful transition from the traditional big studio into
I kind of went
developing.
off on a tangent.
I mean, this is actually one of the main things I want to talk with you about, is into developing not only a teaching platform but a communication platform where you're sharing your ideas about about art and animation, the importance of traditional skill sets, even for free online. And I find that for a lot of the younger generation, my generation, we're born into this world where we're automatically aware of this online presence that we should have or already do have. And there's this balance of we're growing and learning our own traditional skills, but are also trying to develop our portfolio or our persona online or whatever that might be. And there's this, now one of the challenges I feel for an artist of this generation is how much you're creating for yourself and how much you're creating for this online audience. But of course you found yourself, you had a whole
I had a whole career.
You had a whole career beforehand, but I'm curious for does posting online or having that much of a presence, how do you separate some of the art and that desire to communicate and be one of the I mean, I don't think
they're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other, because of what we do. When I'm creating, I'm putting it out there. That's part of my business, right? I think with the younger generation, there's a fine balance between. There's a difference between being inspired by someone online and seeing them and saying, "Wow, that's really cool. What are they doing that I can, learn from?" There's a difference between that and, "Oh man, I'm not as good as that person." That's the difference. And I think there's too much of, "Oh man, I'm not as good as that person." And that's why I try to get people to understand that, focus on you. This age is inundated by outside information coming in, especially, every industry is. And so us in the arts, we're visually inundated by all these different styles and this person's successful at that and they're successful at that. I got to be doing that, and that sort of thing. Rather than focusing on yourself and just really learning what you can learn and be inspired by the people around you, because that's how we all learned. But we just weren't inundated, in the same way.
Yeah, and do you ever feel yourself being overwhelmed with that online and or with posting online, or do you? I'm
an old guy and I don't care. I take, I joke about that. No, I do care sometimes, because my livelihood depends on it. And so, sure, I get sucked up in it. Even as a 60-year-old guy, I'm almost 60 years old.
So how do you take a break? How do you reconnect with the purely artistic side? Do you ever find yourself feeling the need to do art for yourself?
I do, and I do. To relax, I still draw. So I'll just go in my office and sit down and draw.
In a perfect world, he can take a break from all the social media, and I can keep posting and sharing. And he's got such a volume of work. He's so prolific, which is amazing. I don't. The producer and business side of me here, I don't want Aaron sitting there wasting his time posting on social media. Send me the images, I'll take care of that.
Exactly.
We're a team on that. We both, but we used to always say, that's, his joke used to always be, it's a lot easier if we have a Nick.
Because I can just go and create. And it's, but I've also hit a stage in my life, in my career, where I don't have the same insecurities that a young artist does. And I'm not saying I'm not learning anymore, but I've you learn, and then you hit a certain point where you're still learning, but it's going like this, and that's where I am right now. I'm right here, so I feel confident in what I do, and so I'm able to relax. I'll not stress, but I'm very regimented in how I get things done. I've got several projects I'm working on now that I'm like, I got to get home. There's that kind of stress, but I don't stress about if I'm good enough or that sort of thing, which is a whole different thing.
Of course. Well, and I feel like in your process of learning, you're also now sharing the information again, and you've had such a over a decade now of interacting with students, teaching and honing the craft. I'm curious how much of your own artistic process changes when you teach it. Is there anything new that you've learned?
You know, I've gotten much better at understanding what I do and why I do it because I have to articulate it. And it's funny, in the last year or so, I think I've kind of shifted more into the philosophy of art than actually teaching stuff, because I've been teaching technique for 10, 12 years, 13 years, whatever. And now, especially with AI coming in, I'm talking a lot more about the philosophy of why we do what we do. And that idea, whether it's 2D animation, drawing and painting, traditional media, digital media, why an artist does what they do, that sort of thing. I'm still going to be teaching technique and all that kind of thing, but I think we're coming into this age where we're going to be looking into ourselves a little bit more and deciding, why do we do what we do? Because we're going to have machines that are going to be able to do the same thing to a certain degree. And so you got to decide, I do this because I love to do it. I do this because I love the process. I don't do it because of the end result. I don't do it because I'm going to get 5 million views. I don't do it because of any of that stuff. I do it because I like to process the world, and I have thoughts about stories and that sort of thing, and I want it to come out of my hands, and I want to share it with the world. And I love that process. So, I'm talking a lot more about that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And now that you've gone through a full production, over the course of 3 years, it's no small thing to create an animated short film, as you know. Do you feel like that has changed or evolved the way that you perceive what you want to do and how you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it showed us that we could do it. It's funny, we've had a lot of people, we have several people come up and ask, hey, where'd you get your funding? How big was your crew? This and that. I was like, no, we just did it ourselves. I just made it myself. And so you don't need all that funding. You don't need, I think people get it in their heads that they have to have this in place and that in place. No, just go make it. You can figure it out. If you're an animator, make your own little film. But at the same time, we'd like to go a little bigger. I don't want to take 3 years to make a short again. And so I'd love to, that's our next stage and because we did it, we're like, okay, if we did that, then we can do this. And it's like building, a building. You've made it this big, so you can go that big. And maybe we can go that big. Maybe we can go that big. Yeah. And so you just push it a little more each time. So we're really diversifying some of our thoughts, from graphic novels to shorts to series to features and all kinds of ideas. And so, we always call it kind of the spaghetti thing. You throw it against the wall and you see what sticks. And so that's kind of the stage that we're in right now. And I think we have a lot of great ideas, and we're just going to see what sticks over the next year or two.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see where it goes. Now, I want to, bring us back to Snow Bear.
Sure.
I mean, the 3 years of production. I'm curious in your own. One of the things you talked about early on is like the storytelling sensibilities of, the ebb and the flow and reaching the high points and the low points and combining that all together. What is your own, could you talk a bit more about your own writing process?
Yes.
And how that's developed or changed over the years and how you approached it for
my
Snow
writing
Bear?
process, at least writing for film, or writing for something that's going to be animated and tell a story, it starts with a notion. It starts with an emotion. It started with a lonely polar bear in the Arctic. All my ideas come to me, all my best ideas come to me about 4 o'clock in the morning when I'm half awake, not asleep, not awake, and my mind is completely void. And I get ideas, creative ideas then. Or it's when I'm washing my hair in the shower and I'm on autopilot. I don't know what it is. And so that's when Snow Bear came to me. And so that's where I get all my ideas. And if I can, it's funny. It's sort of like when you're daydreaming and you're thinking about something when you're driving and then you realize you just drove 20 miles and you don't remember the drive. That's sort of like what happens if I come up with an idea when I'm in the shower. If I can't remember if I actually washed my hair or not, then I know I had a pretty good idea because I've just been thinking about it through my process. And so then I'll go back and I'll just start thinking about, like this was, a lonely polar bear in the Arctic, and he decides to make a snow bear.
Yeah.
That was it.
That was the shower idea.
That was the shower idea. because I wanted it to be simple. Well, the seed of the idea before that was, it wasn't an idea, it was just a goal. I want to make my own short, and I want to make it by myself.
I remember this day. You called me right after you got out of the shower.
Yeah, I did.
You literally said, hey, I had this idea for a short. What do you think?
Yeah.
I was like, that sounds great. And you're like, it'll be easy.
Yeah.
It's one character.
Yeah. And so that was the prerequisite. It's like I wanted to make it myself. So I wanted it to be one character in a simple environment, and I can just make it, and it's going to be 6 minutes. And so I can do this in about 6 months.
Wow.
It turned out 3 years and
how many? Yeah, several characters.
Yeah. But that's what's That's what happens.
Were there any things within the writing process of Snow Bear that you realized, oh, maybe this is a bit ambitious and we need to cut back on, or did you always?
Yes, absolutely. So that's the next phase. So now it comes to development. I want to develop this idea, and I just sit down. I know even if it's a short, I'm very, very structure oriented. You know, I think I use structure because structure works for a reason. It's not a formula. People, I think they make the mistake of thinking, oh, if you put structure into a film, you're doing a formula. It's not a formula. It's a way of helping you get through the storytelling process. And if something doesn't work, 9 times out of 10, it's breaking the structure. And so it starts to hone. It helps you find where you're lacking. Mm-hmm. And so I think of everything as, you know, in traditional Western storytelling, at least, and the other thing too is it helps you understand where you're breaking the rules, because you can break those rules. And so in this one, because of the simplicity, I wanted to, okay, it's a lonely polar bear living in the Arctic. I want to establish at the Arctic. It's a lonely, big, empty place. Then I want to establish my character in that lonely place. Then I want to establish my character lonely. And so I start picking out these steps of the elements of the story that I want to put out to the audience and start unfolding that story. And so then there's an inciting incident, you know, and so that leads you into the second act. And even though it's 10 minutes long, I have a first, second, third act, climax, you know, the whole deal, you know, the second act low, you know, the midpoint of the film when everything changes, all of that. And so I use that structure and lay it against my story. And so then once we do that, then we start boarding it. And that's where the real experimental part of it comes in, because then you want to see, you know, what you can push. And so one of the ideas we had as we were boarding it was, if he makes one snow bear, then 2 snow bears would be even better. He's like got 2 buddies. And if he had 2, then 10 would be even better. So now he's not lonely anymore. He's in a crowd of snow bears, and he's got all his friends and this and that. And we at one point we had him at a snow bear cocktail party, and he's hanging out, and it just got really broad. It was funny and it was entertaining, but it lost the emotion. It became more broad and slapstick than it was emotional. And I tend in my storytelling, I want to tell that emotional story. We lost the emotion of having that single friend. Yeah. You know, so when we got to the more heartfelt parts of the story, they weren't there because we just diluted it with all these other characters. Yeah. And so we spent a month and a half doing all this stuff where we went, you know what? We went down the wrong road, time to go back. And so we threw it all out and then corrected it. But you have to, you know, that's part of the process. John Lasseter always said, trust the process. You've got to go out, you got to see what works, what doesn't, you got to push it, you got to break it, and then pull it back in again. And so even with a short. And so that's really, it's sort of like writing a letter. There's a Mark Twain quote that I love, that where he wrote this letter. I don't have the exact words, but he writes this long letter and he goes, I'm so sorry the letter's so long, I didn't have time to write a shorter one. Meaning he didn't, you know, he didn't have that time to get concise with what he wanted to say. And it's the same with storytelling. And so it takes time to get it down. I mean, when you watch Snow Bear, you go, yeah, it couldn't be any other way. Yeah. But it took a long time to get to that simplicity.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's not so much like, I mean, there are practical limitations, but it's not really something, it's not just a limitation on the practicality, but on the theme. And right. Through the process, you found this theme, which is the importance that the bear imbues so much emotion into right. this individual snow bear, and right. to dilute that, to make it into multiple bears kind of cheapens its own relationship and its own right. effect. And that inherently also broadens the scope of the film, but you're finding specifically what you want to say and the power of saying that. And I think it's, you know, also fits into our own, you know, narratives and what we can emotionally connect to with finding one person, one image, much more compelling than a group of people. And then it becomes a much greater thing if you start to expand that
and that's the other thing I try to do early on is find that thematic. Once I find that core of the narrative, the A story, the adventure story, right? That's the story we watch on the screen. Then what's the emotional journey? What's the character going through? Because that usually has the thematic in it, and it's just the idea of just never giving up, and persevering through it. It came up often when we were making it early on about, do you want this to be an environmental message? And at first I was like, no, I don't. I want it to be the story about this lonely polar bear because I don't want it to feel like a PSA. I don't want it to feel like we're preaching to people. So I just focused on that. And in my mind, the Arctic goes through seasonal changes. It goes through all this stuff on its own. That's just part of, but there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that. They think the Arctic is always icy. And it is, I mean, by and large, it's icy, and there's a lot of things going on up there that are bad, and the pack ice is going away. But in my head, that wasn't part of the story. But the more we showed the film, the more people said, I really love, on top of everything you've done, I love that environmental message you have. Then we went back and we just said, you know what, it's there whether we intend it or not, so let's lean into it. So then I went back and I didn't really change the story, but I pushed some of the backgrounds. I did some more research. Like there's a shot on the shore where I have chunks of permafrost, breaking off onto the shore. That's a real thing. And it's just little things like that I learned through my research. And so, we leaned into it, and then we became friends. We put it out there, and we contacted.
First, we were friends with the National Park Service.
Yeah, and then we were able to contact Polar Bears International, which is the largest polar bear conservation group in the world, and a big focus of theirs is sea ice, and trying to save sea ice because that's where polar bears survive. When there's sea ice, they can hunt their food, which is seals. Everybody thinks, in the lower 48 with grizzly bears, summertime and springtime, that's the time of plenty, and they fatten up for the winter. It's the opposite for polar bears. In the winter is when they fatten up. In the summertime, they starve. And so the problem with the Arctic now is that those summers are lasting longer and longer, and the ice is becoming more and more brief. You're still getting the sea ice, but it doesn't cover as much of an area, and it doesn't last as long. And so their window of fattening up and plenty is getting smaller. And so that's what's happening.
And what I also hear you describing is a process in which, you're throughout the production of Snow Bear, you made wonderful content and learning lessons to put out so people could connect to it. And it's one of the examples of how in our modern age we can create stories alongside an audience, and you're able to have a bit of this feedback through the process, and you're able to, I think it's one of the beautiful parts about animation is the more, because it doesn't resemble our real world completely, we're able to project so much more onto it. So people seeing that and you reacting to people's feedback about the climate change, about polar bears, and then it turns into something greater. And
which is also the benefit of not showing it in a vacuum. Or not making it in a vacuum. We show it along the way, so you hear opinions, so you can adjust your path along, as you go.
And you have, obviously you have to be careful with that. You don't want to just follow the crowd. You still got to be true to the story you're trying to tell. But backing up on the Polar Bears International thing, we showed it to them, and one of the things that I think, Aaron has always talked about, he made this personal film, and it's a personal story. Ultimately, is the inspiration. But his, for lack of a better way, his catchphrase has always been "put some beauty back in the world," right? That's how he's always signed off on his YouTube videos. And what I think is really cool is that Polar Bears International saw the film and they absolutely loved it and embraced it. And so once it's out, we're still in the festival sort of world right now. But the plan is once it's out, they're going to be able to use it, and it's going to actually help the polar bears. That's the actual thing that's emerged from it. So hopefully some good comes of it.
And we're talking about putting together a small documentary with them and attaching it and maybe doing something with that. But we're also, in November, we're going up to Churchill, Manitoba, which is where the polar bears come in when the ice breaks up during the summer and springtime. And so we're going up right before the ice starts to freeze again. and we're going to go out and track polar bears and all kinds of stuff.
Wow,
So it's going to be cool.
That's exciting. You get to be there in
we're doing it a little bit backwards, but it'll be fodder for our feature ideas. So
yeah,
there you go.
Wonderful. I'm excited to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
I'm curious, throughout the 3-year production process, were there any moments in which you doubted that the film would ever be able to be made? Or
No. I knew it was on me, and I know I'm very singularly focused. I do one thing at a time. I don't do very well multitasking. So I know once I get started on something, I just do it till it's done. Yeah. It was just a matter of getting started. Like I said, we came up with the idea 9 years ago, and we kept talking about it. That's all we were doing, was talking about it. And I realized it was never going to get done unless I decided to go ahead and make it. And so I just said, hey, we got to make this thing or it's never going to get done. And so I sat down and just started boarding it. And I gave myself 3 months, and I boarded it, and we cut it together. We all watched it, and we gave notes to each other, and then I went back and corrected that, and then
I think there's a lesson there I know it's a lesson that we've learned. It's something we've talked about a lot lately, in the past couple of years especially, but in general, I think it's a lesson young artists or young aspiring artists, anybody in life really can benefit from this. Put a stake in the ground and put something on a calendar, because otherwise it's just an abstract idea. We literally picked a date and we put it on a calendar. That's the date, Snow Bear start date.
Yeah.
And we knew we had to get everything done up into that point so we could free up his time to shift over to that.
Yeah, and that's what we did. And so then I just focused on that. And then we got the boards done. And then that was right about the time we went to Europe, and we did a thing in Eindhoven and Playgrounds. We met with Tom Moore. We met with a few people in the animation industry, and I showed them my reel. I showed them the reel of Snow Bear. It was just storyboards. And I got some really great notes. Wow. So then when we got back, I went back and I adjusted the boards again. And so then I gave myself a month to adjust the boards, and it was July of 2022 or 23, 22, can't remember. 22.
Yeah.
July of 22, I started. I said, all right, I'm starting here, and we're not going to stop until we finish it.
And we live streamed.
And I said, I'll be done in 9 months.
Wow.
Yeah, he thought he was going to be done in 9 months.
Yeah, and so that didn't happen. But because we had, things don't always go the way you expect, but I was able to stay pretty focused. But I had an opportunity with Procreate. They came along and said, hey, we got this software that we're coming out with called Dreams. It's animation software. We'd love to hire you to do an animated short for us. And I went, okay, that one's paying. So I went away from that short, my polar bear short, and I went over and made a penguin short for Procreate Dreams. That one took me 3 months.
Someone made the joke the other day that we've done both
poles. Yeah, exactly.
Now we'll go somewhere in the middle and go to the equator.
So that brought more income into the studio, and then I went back and did it again. And then during that time, I had to make some courses. So I'd go off for a couple of weeks and make a course, or a workshop would come up, and I'd go off in 2 weeks and do that. But then I'd be right back to making Snow Bear.
That's wonderful. And so throughout this process, you're describing financials, you're describing the actual process of, setting a stake in the ground, meeting your deadlines, also getting feedback at, different festivals, but online, and teaching courses. And now that, it's not done, of course, it still has its own life that it's going to be living out through festivals. But I think how, you've had your own feature film release in theaters to wide audiences. You've had festival circuit, releases now with Snow Bear.
Yeah.
How does the release of it, how do you even feel about the release of it,
it's
or going to public screenings?
When I made Brother Bear, I was so happy with that film at the time. I look back on it now, and there's a lot that I would change. I've grown a lot, but back then I poured my heart into it. And I tried to tell an honest story. And it wasn't raving reviews. We got some great reviews, and we got a lot of really bad reviews. And that broke my heart. And I was a victim of my own advice that I'm telling now, which is I really cared about what people thought. And because you're so earnest, and you want to put it out there, and you want people to love it, right? And so I learned from that. But I also, since that time, I became a better storyteller. I became a better writer. I became a better animator.
How do you think you've become a better storyteller?
I understand structure better. I understand how to let a story unfold better. I understand what works and what doesn't work better.
But through the process, for someone who wants to have that same growth, like what are the ways that you can grow that own storytelling sense? What is?
I sound like a broken record on this, but it's, you just do it a lot.
Yeah.
You know, the more you do anything, the better you get at it. I always say, if you want to be a great soccer player, play a lot of soccer. If you want to be a great basketball player, play a lot of basketball. You know, everyone understands sports analogies. But if you want to be a great animator, a great writer, a great anything, you do it a lot. And you make mistakes, and you learn from the mistakes, and you make discoveries and all of that. And so you just do it a lot. And then by the time Snow Bear came around, one of the things I think on Brother Bear is I think I compromised. I caved on a few things. It's one of the beauties of working at Disney is just having this crew and all this input and all these wonderful people as part of the crew. It's amazing and it grows. But one of the pitfalls of that is all these people and all these opinions, and it's, you know, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, and you can dilute an original idea. And that one of the benefits I had with Snow Bear is that it was really just a couple of us that were making it. And so I don't think the original core idea was getting diluted, and we were able to, you know, we were trying things and then bringing them back if they didn't work on our own accord. The downside of that is you don't, you know, once again, you don't have a lot of extra ideas that you probably wouldn't think of. And so you got to roll with it. But I like the purity of how it came out. But one of the other things, a major part of Snow Bear that I wanted to talk about is just how do we get people to see it? And how do we build awareness? Because I'm not at Disney anymore. I'm not a Pixar. I'm not a Disney. I'm not a DreamWorks. They have a machine where everyone's anticipating their next film, right? And so now that I'm not part of that world, and on top of it, it's not a feature, it's a short. You know, you can't release a short into a theater. So how do we build awareness? How do we get people to you know, come and see it? And so we thought, hey, we've got this platform where we have 1 million people or 1.5 million people that are aware of us, and they watch us and they see our stuff. I said, you know, why don't we start putting it out there right from the beginning that we're doing this project? And then on top of it, because we have this website and people become members, why don't we show them the process while we're making it? Like, they can actually see me making it live. And so we did that. So twice a week for 3 years. People would tune in, and I might be animating, I might be painting a background or coloring a shot or doing effects, but they would come in and they'd watch me for 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes 5 hours, just in my studio working.
Sometimes it was instructional in nature. Like sometimes he'd be like, I'm going to animate some bubbles today, and I'm going to show you how I'm doing it. And so you'd pick up a little bit of that. And sometimes it was just fly on the wall. I'm going to listen to some music, and we had music playing, and
and people, they could ask questions, and it was great. And so now we get to the end of it, and we've got people all over the world saying, I want to see Snow Bear. When are you going to put Snow Bear out? All because we let people know we were making it. We yelled really loud. You know,
We're definitely a squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the final product is fantastic.
Oh,
really.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to see where it goes in the festivals and finally being
So
released online. Yeah.
I'm just happy to share it. And
to be honest, that's the strangest thing for me. Like the fest, because I love the festivals, and it's really cool to celebrate cinema, and it's neat that all of this stuff exists.
Yeah.
But to be honest, if I just had a perfect world, we would have been done with it and put it right out online.
Yeah.
I mean, because go straight to our end audience.
And then put it out there. We're trying. We're hoping it does well in the awards world and all that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, ultimately, this whole thing is to create revenue, for lack of a better way of putting it out there, so that we can make more.
Yeah.
And it started and creating multiple revenue streams from it. Because this originally, the idea was what we've been talking about, but the reason we were making it was, we said, hey, we're an online course, we sell online education. Let's do a course on how to create your own animated short. And we were like, oh, yeah, that's a cool idea. Well, we got to make a short. And so then that became the polar bear story.
Wow, okay.
And so now we've got that, and we've got over 400 hours of the process recorded. And so we're making the course that way. But at the end of it, because we built this awareness, everyone's going, hey, you got it done. Now we want to see it. And they're like, we want to share it but the Oscars won't allow us to do it until you've won this or that and everything else. And so, but we want to get it out there, and we're going to go ahead and stream it probably by the end of the summer. And we're coming up with some ideas for some supplemental stuff to throw in there to make it worth people's while, and hopefully we can create some revenue from that to put back into creating another film.
Yeah, so tell me about that. So what are you looking forward to in the future? What projects do you have going on now?
Yeah, well, I'd love to make a feature. I'd love to just ultimately my goal is to be in my office animating. If I'm making shorts or I'm making features, I'm happy either way. But I would love to tell a long form story. I'd love to tell a feature. And since we had Snow Bear, and it's a short, and it's kind of a proof of concept in its complexity and how it's made and that sort of thing, right now we're approaching other studios to see if they could fund a project, a feature that has the same level of complexity. And so, in order to make it oranges to oranges, I've written a story called Polar, which is an Arctic story about a polar bear that's lost. As a cub, he's lost, and he's trying to find his way home. And it's a big 3-year adventure that he's on. And so we're in the process of writing that now. And we're going to do the same thing, I'm hoping, we're going to bring people into the studio virtually as we make it.
And are you planning to expand the team?
Yes.
Through that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So obviously, I'm not going to spend the next 12 years making a feature myself. And so, so that's where we need the extra funding. It's one thing for our business to fund me making it, but it's another for it to fund, 35 people making it, or 25 people. Or whatever.
And I think you have this wonderful background where you've understood the studio system from the traditional days of Disney.
Correct.
You've also understood, crowdfunding, independent studio, now doing a film all yourself.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are the lessons or takeaways in particular you want to take from the studio process in what you want to take or leave from that as your
It's the organization. It's the scheduling and organization of it. The creative you've got to do no matter what. That's always there. But if you want to get anything of any scale done, you've got to be organized. You've got to be scheduled. And that's the biggest thing. Because when you can hit your deadlines, and when you can have when it's organized enough for you to hit your deadlines, then that's when you can just relax and create. When you're kind of scatterbrained and you don't know when you're going to get something done and all this kind of stuff, then it just creates stress and it's hard to create. So I'm we get very regimented and goal oriented as far as, okay, I want to get this done by this date. And if I make it, that's great. If we don't make it, then we got to we got to figure things out. But we're always trying to schedule and keep things organized.
The way you're talking, it sounds like you're also producing as well as creative directing. Are you are you looking to change the way the actual producing side of the
No,
film
not really.
happens, or you
Nick is he's slowly coming into that role and learning those chops, and we're all and I'm learning from the other side, the producing side, a little bit more, because I've always been the director side of it, and so we're doing that together. I've been able to learn it over the years through working with producers. And a lot of producing is organization and communicating with outside vendors and things, actors and all the different things that you need to bring in, making sure the money is organized there and it's going to come in and all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping to we can keep it a little bit more simple in that way. And we'll just see where it goes.
We're also, one of the things that here in Europe is fascinating is, they don't do this in America, is they have what they call over here the European collaborative funding model. So we've been getting to be friends with Tom Moore, Cartoon Saloon, and all those films, and they don't. First of all, they're not making their movies for $200 million like they are in the U.S.,
which I think is ridiculous. I think it's wonderful if they've got the money to do it, but I think the machine is a little bit broken when you're having to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of carrying its own weight in a way that you don't. It's unnecessary to spend that level of money. I think there's a point of diminishing returns where you're just
Flow proved that you could tell a compelling story, a successful compelling story, for a tiny
And
budget.
we're not sure what's going to come of it, but we're fascinated by this idea of, the countries kind of band together and throw a little bit of money in the pot for altruistic, not for commercial purposes. In other words, in Europe, they want to invest in, Ireland wants to invest in jobs in Ireland. So they will invest, if this is purely hypothetical, we're not saying this is happening, but if we were to make a part of the film in Ireland, they would help fund a part of the film. The government would to employ Irish animators. And you could do a part of it in Denmark, and then we could do a part of it in Florida that we fund ourselves, and then, you know what I mean? And so there are interesting ways to cobble things together that they do over here that we don't do over there. Now, the difference is those movies don't get as wide of a theatrical release.
That's the next hurdle. To me, that's another hurdle to cross when you get to it. I think it comes down to
first, right?
you got to make it first, and it's got to be commercially viable. Right. That's the big thing. I mean, that's people they cringe at those terms, but I think making your film accessible to a wider audience to be enjoyed, I don't think is sacrificing any of your artistic vision. It's just thinking on broader terms, and so I think that's a big thing that filmmakers, if you want to have a financially successful film, I think, a lot of people say, no, I just want to make art for art's sake. Okay, we still want to make art to make some money so that we can make another piece of art, right? Yeah. And that's the honesty of the industry. And so if I can make a film that's going to make enough revenue to come back to me so that I can keep making films and also pay my mortgage and put food on my table, then that's what I want to do.
Yeah, of course. And I think for 99% of us, we all fell in love with this craft from buying a ticket, sitting down in a theater, and just being taken into another world with the black box around us.
And like I said, even as a 57-year-old old guy, I still love to sit down and just draw cartoons and get transported into the world that's in my head and put it on the paper.
57 years old young. 50.
Yeah, right.
That's wonderful.
Hey, we just rode here 5 miles on bike.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Still getting around.
Yeah,
okay.
Keep going. Yeah, you have such a range of perspectives from the teaching and the art and the online and communicating. I think there's really a lot that you've been able to experience, and I think it's wonderful how much this just pull aside. It's wonderful.
To be honest with you, I'm achieving everything I wanted to do when I started this business. When I decided I want to teach, it's going beyond what I was hoping it would do. Yeah. And so that makes me happy.
Yeah. I'm really happy to hear that too.
Yeah.
That's,
your first goal was you just wanted to be popular for animal drawing. Or not popular, but
I wanted to be the #1 guy that people went to learn how to draw animals in colleges. That was. It's a weird goal, and it's a tiny little niche, but I set that goal for myself because I love to draw animals, and I thought if I can teach people how to draw animals so I can draw animals all the time, then that would make me happy.
Wow. And you set this goal when exactly?
It's like 12 years ago, 13 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. When's it? 13 years ago, 2012.
I think it's safe to say we've hit that.
Or at least to a degree. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it's gone way beyond all that.
Yeah, no, that's the other thing I want to hear more from you is like how your own feeling or your own perception of your artistic fulfillment, how that's changed over time, and why that's changed.
Once again, it goes back to you mature as an artist. When you're young, you're full of insecurities, and you're still soaking things in like a sponge. I like to think that I still soak things in, but the sponge is getting full. But I'm not.
Got to wring you out.
Yeah, but I'm not. I don't have the insecurities anymore. It's more about insecurities of are we gonna make enough money to get this done? Are we gonna make enough money to get that done? It's just what everybody goes through, the economy, that sort of thing. But as far as artistic philosophies and artistic satisfaction. I'm more satisfied now and happier now creatively and artistically than I've ever been in my career. And what's interesting about this, and this is where I get very philosophical and emotional, and I talk about this when I do my career talks, is that, when I was young, I thought I had my life all figured out. And I tell this to people because my audiences are usually young. And I tell them, I said, when I was sitting in your chair, when I was your age, I thought I had it all figured out. Your life never goes exactly how you expect it. And so doors open, doors close, tragedy happens, big wonderful things happen, and they send you in directions that you've never, ever, ever expect, even out of tragedy. I wouldn't be doing this right now and happy with what I'm doing unless my wife had passed away. And that's a really weird thing to think about. If she hadn't passed away and I hadn't gone through that trauma and that heartbreak and this ultimate just despair, then I wouldn't have gone the path that I went to take me to the point where I said, I want to do this thing on my own. Because before she got sick, I had this skyrocketing trajectory at Disney. I was going to be a career guy. I was going to retire from Disney. And I was on a path to do that. But I got taken down a different path. And now, and I had these blinders on because that was my only frame of reference is the studio world. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to go do this other thing because I emotionally was kind of forced to do it. And here I am happier than I've ever been. And so happy that I did it. But it was a horrible experience that forced me to go that way. So, the thing I tell people is, the sun's going to come up. If you're going through a tragedy, if you're going through something that feels like you just don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to open your eyes the next day, just know that life is going to change. Something's going to happen. The sun's going to come up. Just get to that next sunset. Get to that next sunrise. And your life will start rolling again. Because I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to live. But I just decided to keep going. And each day got a little bit less hard. It's never easy, but it gets less hard. And you just get better at it and better at it and better at it. And then here you are. Yeah. But at a certain time, you're going to have a path that's shorter in front of you than is behind you. And I'm at that stage. And so I want to make sure that what I'm doing is going to bring me happiness, first of all, and matter. Because I want what I do to matter to the people that are going to be coming behind me. That's the legacy that I want to leave behind. And so I want to make sure that, at that point, because I know things are going to come in. You just, over time, you gain life experience and hey, I got this path, but something will happen. It's going to change it. But at least this is the path I want to take. And so that's kind of where we are right now. We're at this crossroads.
It's funny you just said the path thing. It kind of made me think, for the people that comes behind me, maybe it's the older people's generation are just signpost makers. It's danger ahead.
Yeah, right.
Or this way's clear.
Yeah, exactly.
Until there's danger ahead down.
Yeah, exactly.
But now we have the tools to be able to communicate that, to record that, to share that with people. And what I also hear you describing through, your own personal journey, your own ability to pull yourself back up, your own and process that is, it is in some sense, it's also the story structure. It's also the feeling when you're watching a short film and you reach that lowest low right before the high. And it's also exactly why we need stories, because stories are a way for us to look at a screen, to see time progress and to see forward momentum.
And the only way you can tell those compelling stories is to live that life. And that's the thing. That's the other thing I tell young artists and young storytellers is to get out there and live life. Don't get away from that screen. Get out there and live, because you've got to go through that emotional spectrum in order to tell those stories and get it on the screen with honesty and compelling, bring people into that world.
Yeah, that's really important. And looking forward to, there's so many exciting things on the horizon for you and your own career, and I'm so happy to hear that you also
I feel like I've got a whole other career left ahead of me.
Yeah. But that you're, the artistic fulfillment and looking forward. I'm curious, of course, for someone who hasn't, experienced the industry through its ebbs and flows, through the 3D to 2D transition and all of that, with a lot of emerging technologies that are coming now, like, what do you feel like are your core tenets that keep you excited for the future and that you're looking for in the future that might be maybe even new opportunities, or how to face any challenges that might come forward?
I want to create because I love to create. I went through going from paper and CG coming in and changing the entire industry and thinking, oh no, we're safe, and 2D going away to a certain degree, at least on the big scales. But here I am, it was 30 years ago that CG came into the world and changed everything. And yet, we were like doom and gloom 30 years ago. And yet here we are, 1995 is when Toy Story came out. And here I am, my career is going as strong as it's ever gone. It's different, and that's what's going to happen. So with AI and all these different things coming in, it's going to affect our industry. It's going to affect the world. It's not just the art industry, obviously, it's everything. It's going to change the world. I think we're on the cusp of, AI coming in, and as it develops is going to change the world in the same way that the personal computer changed the world or whatever. I mean, we're coming into a whole new age of humanity, I think. But we'll adapt, and humans are born to create. We're born to be creative. We're born to express ourselves. We're social creatures. And the ultimate expression of that is to be an artist, whether it's a writer, a musician, or a visual artist. And so I don't care how much AI comes into the world, it's in our nature to create. And so we're just going to keep doing that. Is it going to affect industry? Sure, it's going to affect industry, but it's not going to affect me wanting to create art. And so that's kind of my philosophy moving forward. The outside, I'm going to adapt, I'm going to change, I'm going to have new tools, whatever they may be down the road. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I love to draw, I love to paint, and I love to tell stories. I'm going to keep doing that. I remember us having the conversation when Toy Story came out. And some guys are like, well, that's the end, man. That's the end. And we're like, come on, what are you talking about? And we obviously 2D didn't really start to go away until about 2005, 2004. So we still had about 9 years that it lasted. But
But that same moment, I actually just the other week was talking with another person on this podcast, Patrick Lynn, who was a cinematographer at Pixar for cinematography for the Incredibles, Inside Out and whatnot. And he told me the same moment when actually an early screening of one of the scenes from Pixar played for his team as he was working on a stop motion film. Right. And he was primarily all into camera work. Right. And that moment for him was just this light bulb of, we can now take the camera and bring it into animation. Right. Because he had always loved animation, wanted to go into it, but didn't have the drawing skills to his own words. And
well, even with the drawing skills, it's hard to do with 2D animation. Yeah. And in those days, it was hard to do it really that well with 3D animation.
Yeah. So I think it's an important perspective to have for both yours and his, to see that the same moment for someone else, it's a door opening for them to enter the industry or to join a new industry as it creates. And
and that's what AI is going to do. There's a lot of horrible things that's going on with AI. Obviously, the copyright issues are a big deal, but ultimately that's going to get solved. And AI is here to stay. It's not going to go away. And so ultimately, it's going to integrate its way into our industry. We're not using it visually at all, but I don't know how it's going to affect the industry. A year from now, 6 months from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I mean, we won't even recognize what we're talking about right now, 20 years from now.
Yeah, but I'm sure we're all going to come to it with our own experiences, and that's going to shape.
Right now, there's a lot of prejudices against it that are well-founded, but that's all going to dilute. It's going to go away a little bit, and I think it's going to become, it's integrated. It's going to integrate itself in.
Yeah. But you also have, still believe strongly in the traditional techniques and storytelling.
Well, because I once again, I put out a video on YouTube recently. It was the last video I did before we came out here, just talking about why I do art, because everyone's so hung up on AI art and the image making, the capabilities of AI. And my point being, the end result, the final image that's just the bonus. The joy of creating art is that process. And I don't want to hand that over to a machine. I want to make it myself. And so that's my philosophy moving forward.
Yeah. I keep saying the visual arts right now and filmmaking and all that stuff are going through what music has been going through for 30 years, or for 40 years even. I mean, you can go all the way back to when synthesizers came out and people said, that's not real music and that's going to change, Well, now nobody bats an eye at electronic music or people making music on their computers and stuff like that. That doesn't mean people still don't play guitar,
right?
There's no. It's not like maybe there's a way for everything to coexist. We'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. I mean, in my own work, I've found that it's AI art or AI content creating, there's a level of when you're trying to use it to replicate something that's been done that is inherently, kind of feels bad to your core, but there is also a potential as it is its own medium from a film theory standpoint, from the way that we process a 2D image as either a representation of a three-dimensional space from live action, stop motion, or when you're able to hand draw and you're automatically presenting something on 2D space. There's a different level there's different ways that affects your mind within each medium of animation. And I think one of the benefits of kind of this weird morphing nature of how an AI image tool might understand the world is it might lend itself to memories, it might lend itself to dreams as its own separate form of communication. It's its own separate medium. Not trying to replicate something that's already been done, but trying to the idea of how our even our own brains, like every time our neuron fires.
Yeah, I agree. I can definitely see a time when all of the copyright issues are taken care of and all that, your body of different mediums just grows. If you go all the way back to Lascaux and the cave paintings, they didn't have paintbrushes. They had, or they had a stick, and they're doing that, and that's how they created. The next big advancement in technology was taking, animal hairs and putting them on the end of a stick, and then it holds paint, and I'm doing that, and that changed everything. And now all the guys that were just spitting on the wall, now our jobs are done. You could have some fun doing a short that way. And but what's interesting is spray painting is still around, right? And all the art that's been done throughout the ages that have any kind of lasting reason to be there are still there. And so the mediums are just getting different and broadening. And so, even though we have AI art, there's still people that sit and paint on rocks and paint on canvas, and it is going to become its own medium. It's going to be its own medium, and this, this guy did a hand-drawn animated film. That's going to, that's still going to be there. This guy did a CG film over here. There's the AI film. Here's an oil painting. There's a watercolor painting. Here's some photography. It's just getting bigger choices.
Yeah. More options to tell stories. Are there any pieces of animation or film that you've seen recently that you feel like are underappreciated or that have recently excited you for?
I don't know necessarily underappreciated, because the ones that I see, I think everyone appreciates them. So one film that's been really popular and NSC from a short standpoint, because unfortunately all I've had a chance to do is see the shorts that are in my block because I've had meetings otherwise, was Forevergreen. Forevergreen was really great. Really, really cool. It's a beautiful film and visually stunning, everything about it. I just loved it. And there was another one that we saw when we were in San Francisco at the San Francisco Film Festival that actually won, called The Girl with Occupied Eyes. It's a 2D film, and it's just absolutely stunning. And visually, it's just really great, a really wonderful score.
I think it's based on a children's book. It's really well done.
And it's really nice and simple, but well executed. And then the one that just won Tribeca, Playing God, was super cool. And that's a stop motion kind of claymation type of thing.
Yeah, well, wonderful. Well, I'll make sure to put all of those links to whether they be the trailers and down in the notes
check
for this
those out.
podcast.
Playing God, Forevergreen, and The Girl with Occupied Eyes. They're just wonderful.
If I can say one thing, if you want to learn more about Snow Bear and where it's going to be next, snowbearshort.com.
Yes.
Eventually that'll be its home for streaming.
Let me put a plug in for all that. Snowbearshort.com. Polar Bears International, so it's .org. The National Parks
Conservation Association, which is npca.org.
npca.org. And then just to follow us, it's, any of the social media, it's Aaron Blaise.
Aaron Blaise Art.
Aaron Blaise Art, thanks. What do I do without Nick? And then our website is creatureartteacher.com. And so that's where you can come in and you can watch us make movies and get over 800 hours of art education. So
wonderful.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me.
Really been a
Here
pleasure.
we are in France, man.
Yeah, I know.
Pretty cool.
Made it.
Guy from Atlanta via Armenia, guy from Florida, meeting in France.
At some point, we'll meet in the United States.
Yeah.
Feel free to leave a comment what you thought of this episode. Leave a review. It's very helpful at this point, and share it with whoever you think might be interested.
Right on.
Yeah, wonderful.
Cool. Thanks, man.
For sure.
It was great.